This is a video about quadratic functions, so you want to label it in your notes as 2.5a, and in this lesson we'll cover solving quadratic equations by factoring, square rooting, and completing the square. Quadratic functions are second-degree polynomial functions, so this just means that the exponent, instead of being 1, will be 2, and then often you will see that followed by a coefficient and x plus a coefficient. So this is a quadratic function in a standard form. Before learning how to graph and analyze these functions, we need to make sure you know how to solve a quadratic equation. So just to show you what a linear function is like, just to recall prior knowledge, this is an example of a linear function. So this is just telling you that each x input has one unique y output. So these actually are the same equation, but see here we have a number filled in for y, so it's not a function because it's giving us a particular y value. So let's just plug in some numbers, some x and y values. So we'll plug in negative 2 as x, that would give us negative 4 here, plus 7 would be positive 3. If we have negative 1, this would be negative 2. Negative 2 plus 7 is 5. If x is 0, then y is 7. Remember, f of x is just a fancy way of saying the y output given a certain x value. If we input x as 1, then we have 2 times 1, which is 2, plus 7 gives us 9. And if we input 2, we have 2 times 2 is 4, plus 7 is 11. Okay, so here we have 11 as our y output. So working backwards, we could solve for x. We know from our chart here that x is going to be 2, but let's just solve algebraically. Okay, so we're just combining like terms. This gives us 4 equals 2x divided by 2, and this gives us x equals 2. So the difference here is that the equation is dictating one particular y output value, so it's not giving us the opportunity to input a variety of x values and generate a variety of y output values. And just remember, a function means that for each x input, there is only one y output. And also, just as a reminder, let's say that our function is f of x equals x squared. So in this equation, if we put in 4, we're going to get 16. If we put in negative 4, remember negative 4 squared means negative 4 times negative 4, and a negative times a negative is a positive. So two different x inputs can give the same y output, but you can't have one x input. This is not okay to have one x input give two different y outputs. This is not okay. That would be not a function. So one example of something that wouldn't be a function, just to remind you, would be x equals 3, because for each x input of 3, there's no y value, so x equals 3 is going to have so many different points that go with it, so y could be infinitely many values. And if we graph this visually, remember x equals a number is going to be a vertical line, and then that's going to epically fail our vertical line tests. Okay. So one method of solving a quadratic equation is to factor using the zero product property. So this just tells us that our terms that we come up with when we factor, we can set those equal to 0 and solve for x. So let's practice that. So you might be tempted to divide by x on each side, but you shouldn't do that as your first step. Your first step should be to move everything to one side and then factor out what you're able to factor out. So we can factor out a 3x from each term, and that gives us x minus 4. So then our two terms are 3x equals 0, and then x minus 4 equals 0, and then we just solve for x. So in this case, x equals 0 and x equals 4. Remember that 0 in the numerator is okay. 0 in the denominator is not okay. Alright, I'm just going to pause here just so that I can upload this video and then upload a second video for this next half of the lesson.